Right, well, we're going to turn the questioning now to a different topic. Sir Martin.
I'd like to turn from the intelligence aspect and ask you about your work in the period 2002 and early 2003 with regard to communicating the government's Iraq policy to the media and public and answering the public's considerable concerns and questions. Immediately after Crawford, the Prime Minister set out certain priorities, sometimes they're called conditions, for supporting the United States. The top three were taking the UN route, advancing the Middle East peace process, and gaining the support of public opinion. In your diary at the beginning of September 2002, you write, "It was clear that public opinion had moved against us during August." I'm wondering if you could tell us how you set about dealing with this beyond the dossiers. What was your method? What were your methods of dealing with this problem?
I mean, there was nothing terribly fancy or that you didn't see and weren't able to see at the time. The most unprecedented move was the publication of the dossier. We had at one point what the Prime Minister came to christen as the masochism strategy, which was basically to take him out to very hostile audiences, because what his view was that, and I think he said this in these terms at one of those speeches, it might have been Sedgefield, where he said, look, people are asking you've got some people who will be opposed to what we do, come what may. There'll be some of those. There'll be some people who'll be saying, why haven't you gone after Saddam a long time before this? There are people in the middle who had genuinely legitimate questions that they were asking. I can remember he referred to Gerald Kaufman and another MP, I've forgotten who it was, but he said they'd both made speeches with a series of genuine, legitimate questions. What he saw the communications as trying to do was to answer some of those questions. So, obvious question, role of the UN. Obvious question, is this just about regime change? Obvious question, are you going to do this come what may? What's the impact for the Middle East peace process? Where does this leave you in relation to the broader, what George Bush called the war on terror? So, totally legitimate questions. Will Parliament have a say? So what we were trying to do was answer these questions over time. And the thing about communicating, you can't, there's no one thing that will get through at any one point. You've got to keep setting out arguments. So we planned this. I don't think he thanked me for it that much, but we having said I've got to go out and take on the people who disagree with us, so for example, the day that I discovered about the February dossier and the unfortunate provenance of it, we were up in Gateshead doing a very long, extended programme with Jeremy Paxman for Newsnight, I think with an audience. We had a thing with Trevor McDonald where the ITV, literally their brief was to go and find women totally opposed to what we're doing, fill a room, and the Prime Minister just sits down and takes all their questions and tries to answer them. So that was part of the communications. And the rest of it was just the fact, every week he's in Parliament. Once a month he's got his press conference, fairly regularly up before this committee, out and about. There was nothing that I would say we'd added beyond realising that we were now trying to bring in a more internationalised communications, trying to tie in much more closely to the Americans, because the reality is their communications can affect ours, and they did understand that. I think some more than others. I think it's fair to say that I know Donald Rumsfeld's name has been mentioned a few times at this committee, and I think there were times when you thought he could have maybe thought a bit more about the impact of public statements on other countries. But
again, about a month, almost exactly a month after your September diary entry, you note Iraq still tricky. TB just wished the Americans would do more to put over a proper message to the world.
Yeah.
Did you have American interlocutors who you were able to put this to?
I did. And to be fair, they were always very. I go back to I'd actually like, if I can, to I'd like you to see the papers that we did around Kosovo and September the 11th that developed in this way, because I think that was the basis, and those relationships were very good. I spoke most days to. We had a system whereby if anything that any of us felt untoward or difficult, requiring immediate attention, happened, any one of us could instigate a conference call at any time.
What were the aspects of American presentation that you found disturbing or unhelpful?
I suppose. I mean, I don't. They have a very different political system. You can't choose your the leadership of another country. But I think it was just really that question of not always understanding that their statements and positions would have an impact way beyond their shores. They felt very comfortable with the idea of just saying, look, Saddam's a bad regime, has been for a long time. It was Clinton's policy to go, to regime change. That's our policy too. Now, to be fair to George Bush, I think he got this more than others in his administration, if I can put it like that. There wasn't at least an understanding that there were other countries out there and they had other interests. So, for example, just to give you one example where people talk about what was he able to do in relation to George Bush. I can remember at Hillsborough, I think it was April the 7th, 8th, when the UN, the issue of the UN's role in any aftermath was fairly high up the agenda for whatever reason at the time. And Condi Rice was very, very... she was quite insistent that any words that were agreed at that meeting at Hillsborough were not too forward in relation to the role of the UN. And I can remember and she wanted to say it would be an important role. And I can remember saying, well, that sounds a bit grudging. And her basic attitude, well, it's kind of meant to be. And the Prime Minister went and saw George Bush and said, look, this has got to be stronger than this. And I think, if I'm right, that finally they agreed that there would be a vital role for the UN, and that was important when subsequently the UN did become involved in the aftermath. So I think that the exchanges, the relationship at the very top level between the President and the Prime Minister, very frank, able to have very, very open discussions. I think it was the same. I think David Manning had a very, very close and professional relationship with Condi Rice, and I tried to do the same with the communication. So most days I would speak to my opposite numbers in the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon, and if there were problems, say to them, look, you're giving us a problem here. And if they would say to us likewise, look, why do you guys keep going about the UN the whole time when what we're trying to do is keep our Republicans on board for this and that? And that's just the way political exchanges are, I guess.